Welcome to The Access. I'm your host, Hayvi Bouzo. In this episode, we'll be discussing the recent developments in Libya, the protests in Algeria, and the Egyptian constitutional referendum. To discuss these topics, we are joined by Ben Fishman, Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute, and Karim Mezran, Director and Resident Senior Fellow of the North Africa Initiative at the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much both for joining us today. We will be talking about the situation in North Africa and in the African Arab part of the world, if we can say that. Let's start with Algeria. Where do you think things are heading now, knowing that the protests are continuing, even though Bouteflika is gone, but the people don't seem to be as satisfied with the new arrangements? And we can start with you, Karim, or Ben. Go ahead.
Well, it's really startling what's going on. Everything in Algeria was relatively stable for years, but in a period of several weeks and several Fridays of tens and hundreds of thousands of protesters on the street, the people spoke and forced Bouteflika to resign, with the army really playing a major role in that. But they're not satisfied, as evidence of the ongoing protests. So I think the situation is very much up in the air still. And their call for the system at large to change suggests that this could be an unstable situation for quite a long time.
Quite a long time. Karim, would you say that people are not satisfied because there is let's say the impression, at least from people here, that the military did control the situation even during Bouteflika time, that he was not the actual ruler of the country, but maybe a facade? Do you agree with this assessment? Why do you think the anger is
not necessarily.
continues?
I think that the angry of the people is something that is being cultivated and getting grown for the day after the revolution against the French, the day after the War of Independence. The regime has been oppressive. The regime has been authoritarian to a certain extent and very corrupt, and people are really tired of it. And they showed it in 1988 with the riots that then plunged the country into the black decade of the fight against terrorism, as it was. And then in the 2011 beginning of the various demonstration that we had, that Bouteflika put down by promising promising reforms.
In 2011.
2011. He didn't maintain this, so the anger kept on rising. And when he announced, when it was announced that he would run for a fifth mandate, that was what caused all of this demonstration. But we have to realize that demonstrations are not are relevant now because they acquired the national character. But Algeria has been plagued by local demonstrations, local riots, local protests, local strikes since 2011, almost every day.
Yeah.
So the good thing about
Algeria.
In Algeria, the good thing is that very rarely they turned violent. So there is I see a very uneasy balance now between the army, lack of will of intervention, but the fact that they might intervene if the demonstration go out of control, and the demonstration were trying to keep the pressure on the army and the pouvoir, what they call the government, and they need to maintain it peaceful, so as not to provoke the army into a military reaction.
Do you think that there is right now, I mean, you're talking about a government that's been oppressing its people for, you're saying, since the 80s. It's nothing new. But now I mean, it's the army that's in front now. It's in the army's hand. Everybody knows it. Are we going to be seeing a pushback by the army? We did hear in the news that there was an attempt by some Islamists, that's according to the government, to the military in Algeria, that they were trying to carry out some attacks, that they were planning and rallying during the protests. What do you make of these allegations? I mean, some people fear that this is another kind of way of trying to crush the protests by claiming that there are Islamists rallying. I want to hear your input on this, Ben.
I think that's been a rumor since day one, that the regime would plant some violence or protest or plant some impetus for violence, which would give it an excuse for the army to go in. But they allowed it. They have avoided that situation between the business elite, between the security elite, that's why Bouteflika was still around for as long as they could, because no one could agree on who would replace him without disturbing this tentative balance. Now that that's balance has been disturbed, the real question is whether the protesters will agree to hold elections according to the constitutions, or demand more significant change. And the jury's still out on that.
What do you think the amount or the size of the Islamists in this revolution in Algeria? I mean, the impression is that the Islamists have no popularity in a country like Algeria because of the history of what happened, as we recalled, in the 80s or in the 90s. So can you tell us about what do you think the situation is in terms of Islamists trying to infiltrate the protests?
I think that the official Islamists, the two or three parties that base their consensus on the doctrine of Islam, who are part of the legitimate political panorama of the parties in Algeria, are powerless and are not, as you said, not that popular, and they cannot do much. There has always been in Algeria some Salafi groups who are more powerful than they are made of, or other groups who are still into hiding, but I think that is marginal. I really think that what we are seeing is the civil population of Algeria. It doesn't have to do anything to do with Islamism or infiltration or that sort of stuff. We have seen the judges in the streets demonstrating against the regime. We have seen the teachers. We have seen the employees of the government itself. We have seen the students, the everyday person. And the request is against a regime that has closed all the avenues of participation, a regime that is so elitary that they've lost its touch with the people. I think that it is stretching the narrative by saying that it is due because of the infiltration of the Islamists, which is always the excuse that the government, that all the authoritarian governments in the region, not only in Algeria, as we know very well, they use the excuse of the bad Islamists who are there. So that's the reason why we have martial law. That's the reason why we military are forced to control and to govern, because there are the bad Islamists over there. But it is a fake narrative.
It's a fake narrative?
It's preposterous.
But other countries in the region have helped Islamists kind of gain access. Like if we can talk about, for example, the Qatari role in countries like Syria, where there was support on their media platforms for Islamic elements. I mean, I know that North Africa is a little bit different situation, is further away. Maybe now the situation is different in terms of the GCC and all of the internal situation going on. Do you worry about this type of attempts to happen in North Africa as well? And I'm going to start with Algeria.
Yeah, but you have to understand the nature of the Algerian state before. Qatar or other Turkey or other potential supporters of Islamism were just as alienated as other outside interference in Algeria. The whole identity of the Algerian system is based on non-interference. I'll make another point that there's no Islamists present given their organization and abilities, and the lack of organization by the initial protesters took advantage of the situation. I don't think that's a parallel in Algeria, because the history that Karim just talked about the lack of organization, and the strength of the military, and the public perception of opposition to Islamists returning.
What would you say about that?
I agree definitely. Also, the official Islamists have been always accused of becoming the pets of the regime, the Islamist pet of the regime. They did not gain any ground or any consensus among the opposition, among the population. I mean, I don't want to say something too far-fetched, but it's a metaphor that can help. That's why they don't have much popularity. And the extremists have been, as Ben said, rejected because of their violent approach. So I really don't see them as important actors.
Yeah.
So far.
So, I mean, if we want to talk about right now in terms of the army trying to handle the situation today, do you think the Algerian military is able to contain the situation, to push for an alternate way forward, including a government that is, you know, by the people and for the people, and maybe agreed upon by the protesters in the streets? I mean, it seems a very kind of a delicate balance today.
Yeah. It's a delicate balance, and they have to be very careful, because Gayed Salah, the chief of the army, once he pushed Bouteflika out, or supposedly he was the determinant factor, also is being the such associates to Bouteflika. So is that the end of the day is they replace one power center with the Bouteflika with the army power center under Gayed Salah. I don't think that's going to satisfy the protesters. More realistic is some kind of agreed process forward that includes elections. But you know, militaries aren't specialists on political transitions, and we've seen that in the region, but also all over the world. So it's going to be a delicate balance for, as I said initially, weeks, if not months to come.
What do you think, Karim, about the Algerian military?
Yeah, they have to be very, very careful. If they push too much in order to maintain power, they might provoke some parts of the demonstration into violence or into bad things. If they, on the other hand, do not go fast enough, they will leave to the square too much saying, and that may cause the fall of the regime and the implosion of the whole system, which is not to be wished for.
Yeah.
Because an unstable Algeria coupled with an unstable Libya, difficult Tunisia, it will be it will spill over to Morocco, it will spill over to Europe. I don't even want to get into the consequences or the potential bad things that can happen if Algeria implodes.
But do you think they have the capability? I mean, like Ben mentioned, that usually the army is not an expert in political transition.
But it's
do you
not
think
only
they have the expertise and the understanding?
It's not only the army. There are other people. There are businessmen. There is a whole elite in Algeria that makes part of this pouvoir. So they, someone there might have the brain. I don't mean that there is a Machiavelli in Algeria, but somebody who understands how to utilize communication, how to utilize repression, or at the same time concessions, in order to appease the square, the street, and leave at the same time space for the pouvoir, for the elite to reform in such a way as to guarantee a successful transition. Because I think Algeria is in a transition de facto from a model into searching for another model.
So yeah, so it's basically right now it's up to the military to see how it's going to be handling the situation, the ongoing situation in Algeria as we know today. I do want to stop on Egypt for a little bit before we go to Libya, because Libya is going to be, I think, the bigger chunk of our show today. I mean, and I know that we can't be talking about Sudan as much, but we can't not mention, Ben, if you can just give me a minute here about just the general situation in Sudan, giving now the Egyptian position, the Gulf position by different countries, agreeing with what happened, supporting the new leadership, the transitional body that was created.
Right.
Do you think Sudan it could be on the path for a successful model compared to the other countries in North Africa today and what they're facing, knowing that
Right.
Sudan is not in North Africa, as you mentioned to me earlier?
Sudan faces the problem of lack of money. That's to state the obvious. And that's why they're going to be incredibly reliant on the Gulf. Criminal actions in South Sudan and Darfur, who is now calling the shots. So in one sense, what the people unpredictably did to overthrow Bashir was really surprising, and in some ways inspiring. But on the other hand, there's no way to predict what's going to happen next, because if they're replacing one dictator with another, and I think the Sudanese military is far less disciplined than the Algerian military, if you want to make that comparison. I think the protesters have a longer way to go to figure out what they're insisting on.
And Egypt was supportive of this new, body and the initiative by the military in Sudan.
Right.
But Egypt has its own also issues going on in terms of the referendum. The people in Egypt writing and posting, and actors going out of the country, protesting, trying to keep, for the attempts to keep Sisi in power. And now we saw that he's going to stay for one more presidential period. Do you think, given what happened previously in Egypt, and now the ongoing situation in the surrounding countries, the Egyptian people are going to be accepting, and we're going to see calm, and just people are going to be waiting to see what's going to happen in Egypt rather than seeing any chaotic situation erupt as of this point? What would you like to say, Karim, about this?
I think you're right. I think that the vast majority of the Egyptians are cautious, are not happy but not unhappy of the regime. Since they drank the narrative of the regime that there is a war against Muslim intelligentsia, group of society. They realized perfectly that they fell back into an autocratic, authoritarian system, and they want to at least exercise some pressure on the regime so that it will open. It understands that what Sisi's promise was: I am intervening to eliminate the Muslim Brotherhood, but I will keep on leading Egypt towards democracy and democratization. Whether he means it or not, it's beyond the point. The lead or group of Egyptians are saying, well, then now keep the promise and allow for the democratization or the pluralization of the country to take place and to go ahead. So there is the beginning of that movement, which will create a tension. That's why the regime is relying more and more on the anti-Islamist terrorist narrative, because it's the only legitimacy they can really claim in order to maintain the martial law, in order to maintain the control of society, in order not to respond to the demands of the people, of the groups, organized or not, who are asking, now what? Now what do you want to do? You want to become a dictator for life and maintain the system even after you promised that you would change that?
Yes. So for now, we're going to see calm in Egypt. Do you agree with that, Ben?
Relatively, but I think the economic performance will be key. As long as they're relatively stable economically and things aren't drifting southwards, they'll be okay as long as they receive the necessary support from the outside and undertake the reforms that they're doing with the IMF program. They'll be able to survive the coming period. But Egypt's population is booming, and they'll require more and more resources to address address that fact, and to feed the population, to provide water. That's why Sudan is so crucial for them, partly. And it comes down to governance, not just who's in power, but how they govern.
How they govern. In terms of Sisi's last visit to Washington, people said that it wasn't the most successful visit. After the return, there were speculations that he wasn't as happy, and then there was also, we saw that Egypt, for example, pulled out of the Arab NATO initiative. How would you describe Sisi's visit to Washington and him meeting President Trump? Do you think it was success for Sisi?
It's very hard to say because a lot goes behind closed doors. So you really don't know what they really said, what they really told each other. What Sisi really asked, and the president did not give it to him. Apparently, they were dissatisfied, but we really don't know what goes on into this kind of negotiations. Therefore, it's very hard to predict whether there will be a reaction in one direction or in the other from Sisi or from the president. It remains to be seen what are the products of that visit.
What do you think, Ben?
I think on the military, specifically on the military issues, that he wanted to receive assistance. I don't think Sisi was happy, and that's when the Egyptian government starts making noises that they'll just use Russian systems instead. That's easier said than done because of the long history of American military cooperation with the Egyptian military, but we've seen this since 2013, 2014, when the military came back into power, and the Obama administration pulled away on some aspects of the military assistance program. This is going to be a game that the Egyptians will be playing with the U.S. for quite some time.
We will be right back after a quick commercial break. We are back with our guest for tonight's episode, Ben Fishman, Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute, and Karim Mezran, Director and Resident Senior Fellow of the North Africa Initiative at the Atlantic Council. We did, and I want to actually move to Libya. There is a confusion on the American position, especially by the Trump administration, on who is the legitimate party in Libya today. Traditionally, it was the Sarraj government that was acknowledged by the United States and France and other countries. Now we saw that President Trump actually made a phone call and spoke with Haftar after Sisi's visit. Do you think there's a connection there between Sisi's visit to Washington and what happened, and the American change, and especially President Trump's change towards Haftar?
I don't.
Karim, or both of you, I want you to answer this.
Yeah, I don't think so, because Sisi has talked to Trump even before, and the support of the Egyptians and other countries for Haftar has been ongoing for many years now. So that approach to tell the president or the American administration, Haftar is a good guy, Haftar is a good guy, Haftar is a good guy, has been going on for a long time. So it's not that Sisi comes for the first time in Washington, for the first time he approaches the president, and for the first time he tells him what to do. It's not so. So I
didn't say that he told him what to do, but yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he
suggested.
He suggested.
Gave an idea. And he might have done it, but I don't think that was decided. The American administration has no position, has not changed. The State Department sticks to what Pompeo said the first day and reiterated continuously. The National Security Council did not issue any contrary statement. The statement to Pompeo's position that the United States is behind Serraj.
Okay.
That is the mantra. That has been the mantra for 4 years now, since for even more than 4 years. We are behind the negotiations of the United Nations to reach a peaceful solution. The legitimate government is Serraj, but we do recognize the de facto existence of another part that we will try to bring into the negotiation so that we will resolve the situation.
And that is Haftar.
And that is Haftar. So that was the official position. Now, there's been this phone call made Monday, leaked on Wednesday, Thursday, came out on Friday, of the president talking to Haftar. Now, we don't know the context. We don't know what happened around him, why he took that phone call, why he made it. And even reading the statements adds, as you said, to the confusion, but does not in any way change the American position. It doesn't say, oh, we will recognize you and don't recognize the other side. He simply said, we do recognize your play, your role in anti-terrorism, which is also wrong, but it's much more limited in its effect. It has been made a big deal of by the press and other media. I think it has been a significant issue, the fact that the president calls Haftar, if that is really what happened. The American position has not changed.
Has not changed, in your opinion. What do you think, Ben? Is that a change?
Well, it's an optimistic view, and I hope that's correct. But I think when the president does something, it changes the dynamics of the entire administration, even though it may not be coordinated with the rest of the administration. So
they hear of it as everybody else.
Yes.
That's true. In your opinion.
Sometimes after.
Sometimes after.
Yes. And so Haftar launched his attacks on Tripoli on April 3rd. It took 4 days for the administration to say anything. There was a joint statement about ceasefire and encouraging ceasefire and encouraging the UN-backed peace process, but the U.S. made its own specific statement by Pompeo saying he opposes Haftar's LNA offensive against Tripoli. So I don't know exactly how many days later the president calls Haftar, and then, as Karim said, the call leaked out 4 days after that. And that American policy since the Obama administration has always been to put UNSMIL, the UN support mission in Libya, in the lead on political negotiations. Trump reiterated that at the beginning of his administration when he said the U.S. has no role in Libya except for counterterrorism. Now, it sounds like to me, if the president is reaching out to not a head of state like he usually does, but to a military commander, he's changing that dynamic by inserting the U.S. traditional policy of supporting the UN-backed government. I think it's probably somewhere in the middle. Trump probably, for his part, doesn't know the details of the situation, is probably attracted to the fact that Haftar may be portrayed from others as a strong man. But the longer this goes on and the longer he's not able to deliver, he loses credibility in the administration.
Yes.
And he gives voice, or better voice, to those saying, look, he can't win and he can't control, even if he does have some success in Libya, that's not the stablest outcome. So the best thing is for us to go back and support the UN-backed process. And hopefully the result of this period between the phone call and now will be the reemergence of a clear U.S. policy. But for now, I think it's right to question where we are in Washington, and I think everybody who's a player in the Libya political games, including the Libyans themselves, are wondering where the
where
US
the United
stands.
States stands. But internationally, though, there's still the same position. The United Nations recognizes the Sarraj government, also France, also Britain. I mean, nothing else changed here. Is that the
And the UN couldn't even call for a ceasefire last week.
Yes.
And that was
Why?
also disturbing. Well, from what I understand, the Russians insisted that Haftar not be named as the offender, the LNA. But I'm not sure. The Americans also opposed the draft of resolution that the UK proposed. But I don't know on what basis they opposed it, whether they share the Russian view or not.
What do you think, Karim, in terms of the international recognition and obviously the United Nations? Because as this is true, they couldn't even find a way to have a ceasefire.
No, the United Nations undoubtedly lost a lot of, I don't want to say power, but of influence over Libya. Libyans don't trust the United Nations anymore. Haftar attacked the city the day the Secretary General of the UN was there. And when the Secretary General of the UN, Guterres, went to Marja to talk to Haftar, it was very rude to him and almost...
From the United Nations.
And almost kicked him out. So
Haftar kicked him out.
yeah.
Okay.
So and there is this picture that went all over Twitter of the Secretary General of the UN almost bending in shaking the hand of Haftar. That picture in Libya meant so much because it showed the people, even the United Nations are bowing to him, so they cannot be trusted.
The image of the United Nations, even though they officially still continue to recognize the Sarraj government. And the same applies to Europe.
Europeans are more divided than they seem, as
Yes.
you know very well. You have the Italians who are for Misrata and for Haftar. No, the Italians are for Sarraj.
Sorry.
The Italians are for Sarraj.
They're for Sarraj.
Yeah,
Italians.
For the legitimate government of Tripoli. The French are in a more ambiguous position. They say, we are for Sarraj, we are for the United Nations, we are for the legitimate government, but there is evidence of French military support for Haftar's troop.
Okay.
So there is this ambiguity of French policy that is also causing Italian reactions against France. Some declarations have been made by the Minister of Interior Salvini against France, and some other Italian politicians. They blame France for
not being very clear about its position.
And for having support. And then there is Russia, who is at the same ambiguous policy. They are in favor of the government of Sarraj because they sit in the United Nations Security Council. So they say Sarraj is the legitimate president, but we help Haftar.
Yes. So they do. Yes, we know that Russia does help Haftar.
Go figure out.
Well, I mean, there are the accusations by Haftar and his supporters that there are Islamic militias within the government by Sarraj, and that they are in Tripoli, and that's what they're going after. What do you make of these claims, and what do you think of, the legitimacy of having these concerns about the situation in Libya, having Islamic militias? And I want to hear from you, Karim. I'm going to ask you about this then
I think this is a preposterous accusation. There are few militias. But by the way, the main Islamist or Islamic-oriented militia is formed by Salafis, the Rada forces in Tripoli, who are of the same Salafi sect of the Salafis who militate in Haftar's troops.
Oh, they're the same?
Yeah, because Haftar has a strong component of Salafist in his army.
In his army?
Yeah, which is something that is not worldwide known, but it is known. So
what's the name of this Islamic
Madkhalis.
Madkhalis.
Yeah.
And the same component is in Tripoli.
Yeah. They don't talk to each other, but still, ideologically, they are the same. So then there is a smaller Islamist militia, the Nawasi. There is a small militia of Islamists in Misrata, but by no means they are majority. And attacking Tripoli is a quintessential expression of this.
Yes. What do you think, Ben?
I mean, there are Islamist-affiliated militias in the coalition of militias in Tripoli that who are forced to defend Tripoli now, but it's more because Haftar has initiated this coalition, not been achieved for so long, getting most of the militias from outside the city to withdraw to their towns and cities. Haftar has brought them back again, and that's a problem.
Yes.
It's just a reflection of the fact that Libya doesn't have a valid security force on either side. And the Egyptians were working very hard, I think, to, with a mixture of former military officers under the previous regime to create a new structure for the military. But Haftar blocked that process as well. But the last thing I wanted to say was on the Haftar coalition was, and then I just forgot.
We're talking about like
The Karim operation.
You can.
no, it's okay. You can. So
Yeah.
you were talking about his military,
Right.
actions. Despite there's like the Egyptians who were helping, trying to do something.
Yes.
That those militias were
Yeah.
outside of Tripoli, and he brought them back in by
Right.
attacking. That's what you were saying, and then maybe something else that you wanted to add to
I'll come
support
back
this
to it.
point. Yeah, it's okay. That's not. And I mean, there is also this kind of a situation in the region that is playing a role in complicating the situation in Libya. When you hear the calls on, Turkish troops to come in and that they are going and sending weapons and support for the militias in Tripoli, and having that dynamic that's playing in the Middle East affect Libya a lot. Do you think this has reality, evidence of being facts, that there is this sort of like this access supports Haftar and this access supports the other elements? Do you agree with this assessment of the situation, or this is more like a media campaign rather than the situation on the ground?
No, it is true. The Libyan militias, the Libyan sides are being supported by foreign backers. The Arab Emirates, Egypt, Russia, and France are heavily behind Haftar.
Okay.
Are heavily supporting him. And to an extent, Turkey and Qatar are supporting the Misrata, some other militias in Tripoli. That is also
That's happening.
possibly. We don't have
Yeah.
proof of that. While we have lots of proofs of the other happening Haftar, we do not have many proofs of
the other side.
Qatari and Turkish supporting him. There are
But there's the media, there's a lot of those in the media
Yeah.
circling around with these news.
That's part of the narrative of Haftar.
I mean, there's a point that Ben mentioned that was important. It's not seeing results after this launch of attack against Tripoli. Now we see that it's going to be a long battle. This is a big city. This is the capital. Do you think Haftar will be able to hold on and continue? And then what is the price for having this type of attack on the civilians? And then what about the American position? What's going to happen? I mean, there's a lot of question marks. But in your opinion, the point Ben mentioned about, until when are they going to wait and see the results of the attack by Haftar against those militias that he claims to be Islamic?
That's the big question. If Haftar had won very quickly, probably the whole world would have said, okay, it's a fait accompli, you took Tripoli, we recognize you. In fact, he didn't. The Tripolitanians resisted. So if Haftar loses and is forced to withdraw to the Rim, there will be a different scenario. If the situation remains stalled as it is, then we're going to face a very bad humanitarian crisis. Because the fight would be street by street, suburb by suburb, as it was in Benghazi to a certain extent, with a lot of civilian victims, with difficulty to access the hospitals, with difficulty to evacuate the civilians, with, I can imagine, a lot of problems. And that will be
a very big,
very big
humanitarian disaster.
And the Americans, I refuse to think that they can sit down and allow for all this to happen 100 or 200 miles from Europe, or how many miles are there, without any intervention, without any reaction, whether at the diplomatic level, whether at the political level, whether at the military level. It is very hard.
Do you expect that we're going to be seeing any military intervention by foreign governments to support Haftar in the future if things don't move forward as quickly or as they should?
It's a distinct possibility. Some forces are most likely already on the ground or supporting his forces.
By who?
The ones that Karim already mentioned. The UAE, France, again, ambiguously, because I think, like our system, the foreign ministry and the defense ministry aren't necessarily in the same position. We haven't mentioned the fact that Haftar visited Saudi Arabia very shortly before.
Yes. What would you say about that, Karim? Do you anticipate seeing any public intervention to support Haftar?
I think we're already seeing it. There are drones being spotted that don't belong to Haftar's army but fight for Haftar. Speculations are Emirati, are Egyptians, are Russians, are French, we don't know, but there is technology that is being used in the battle now that does not belong to the LNA, Haftar's forces. So this international support is coming, which is what the Sarraj government is objecting, says, you are not arming us, you are not helping us, which are the legitimate government, but you are helping openly the guy who is attacking us. This imbalance is going to create a problem for the future, no matter how it ends up, because people will remember.
So I guess we're going to have to wait and see what's going to happen on this ongoing developments and the whole region, but specifically in Libya where the conflict is starting for Tripoli. Thank you so much both for joining us today. I would love to have you again in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us.
That was it for tonight's episode. Thank you for watching us. Good night.